Guys, welcome to the Physique Factory podcast. I'm your host, Conor Moran, with my co-host, James Tilsley. Today, we're going to be talking about fitness myths, and we're just going to run through a few of them and let you guys know our opinions on them. So we're going to start with, or James is going to start with, because this has been pissing him off, foam rolling. So I'll let you take over here, James.
Cool. So you probably see a lot of people in the gyms, stretching, foam rolling, getting the massage going, getting stuck in there. Maybe if something's like tight or you've got a little niggle or injury anywhere, probably it's not the best thing to do. Well, chances are it's not the best thing to do if it's injured. Or if you're going to stretch, it could potentially do a little bit more damage. We're getting into like passive ranges where you can't actually go.
So maybe explain that a bit better for the people that don't know. What is a passive range, James? This is like a test for you
now. So passive ranges there are positions where you can't get into, and you're getting forced into it by gravity or another resistance, or an external resistance you can't get there naturally. Maybe might cause a bit of disruption to the joint, or you just need to be careful with things like that.
So a good example would be, if we're going to bench press, for the people that can see this that are watching on YouTube, I'm pulling my arms back as if I'm doing a bench press here. And wherever that kind of comes to, that'd be your active range. That's the range I can actively get into. A passive range is going to be anything from there to the end of your kind of joint range, like your structural limit, basically, isn't it? So
that's it. It just totally depends on the person as well. Some people could tolerate it, some people can't. So again, chances are let's not like do that. And there's other ways of going about it. I mean, if something's tight or weak, it's probably that's not probably just the sole reason. There's other things as well. But stretching can have some sort of benefit, but it's not long term and it won't solve problems. I mean, it's got an analgesic effect, meaning it's going to take some of the relief away from the pain in the short term, but not like in the long term. So it's like sort of a sensation, as well as like foam rolling or with a massage gun.
So with tightness, I suppose like there's going to be a reason something's tight. It's a reaction from your nervous system, essentially, isn't it? So why are we getting that reaction? That's kind of what you want to look at. So like if we're feeling tight, an example could be, something could be on in a relatively lengthened or stretched position and feel tight. So, I mean, I'm sitting at a desk right now. Here's a really good example. And if I'm sitting at a desk and my shoulders are kind of rounded in, I'm slightly kind of protracted, that kind of way, it's slightly hunched over, my upper back could feel tight, and nothing on my upper back would actually be tight or shortened. They would actually be lengthened. But you're getting that sensation because something there's just not quite right. So this tightness kind of sensation we're getting, it could be potentially a protective mechanism. It could be just a sign that something's not right in general, I suppose.
I mean, that protective thing, if you've got like an injury or anything like that in the past and you might have like thought you've recovered from it, then there's probably like a synergistic role that the other muscles are going to play to stop you entering that range. That might cause like a few problems. So that's why protective tension might come into play, as well as active and insufficiency and passive insufficiency. But that's like the length of a muscle compared to another joint angle, but won't really touch on that.
Yeah, that's getting complicated for some people, even ourselves at times. So I suppose what we're getting at is like, okay, foam rolling's not. We're not saying anything's bad on this podcast today, but like, don't just say, "Oh, this is tight" or "This is sore, I'm going to foam roll it." Think deeper. Like, why is this happening? What is causing this pain or this sensation, this tightness that we're getting? And what's going to be the best way to sort it? Is it rolling on a foam roller? Probably not a lot of the time. But
majority of time, it's always improving like contraction around that muscle or that joint of the muscles. So that will definitely improve it in the long run.
100%. Yeah, I think the one a lot of people go on about is when you're I'm forgetting the name of it now. This is terrible. But when you foam roll on the side of your leg, what you call it, your IT band. I couldn't remember the name of that there. I'm pretty sure that has like the strength of like a steel, basically. So like if you took a foam roller to a bit of steel, what is that going to do?
It's not very stretchable anyway. You can't really stretch Yeah. So having a tight IT band is probably not the case.
Yeah. So maybe something
Cool.
more to do with the muscles that actually set onto it.
Yeah.
But
Or
anyway,
anything around that joint. Cool.
yeah. But
So next one.
but
What's the
I mean,
best
just I suppose to
exercise?
round that up, if you do like doing foam rolling, I mean, feel free to do it. But like, I suppose what we're saying is it's not always just the best kind of option, and you might be wasting your time a little bit with it. Might be. I don't want to say anything too you know concrete, but yeah, you might be wasting your time. So yeah, what we'll move on to from there. Let's start with squat ass to grass, since I've done a post about it earlier.
We're not doing the best exercise thing to start it off with all the in order.
Yeah, okay. We'll start off with that then. So I suppose number like fitness myth number two that we're going to go on to is the best exercise for glutes. And I'm using glutes as an example. Like this is anything, people like to say, what's the best exercise for chest? What's the best exercise for glutes? What's the best exercise for biceps? And to say there is a best exercise for anything would just it'd be a bit of a bold statement, a bit of a blanket statement, really, because I mean, as you guys would probably know if you've listened to us before, we talk about everyone's an individual and everyone's built differently and everyone has different, limb lengths, things like that. And yeah, so to say there's a best exercise for everyone, just like this is the best exercise for your triceps and that's it, well, it's just bullshit, isn't it? There might be an exercise that's better for you, and there might be a different one that's better for me. But to say there's the best exercise for just a muscle group in particular would just be bullshit, as I say.
So behind that sort of thing, I'd say, so if an individual had like a shoulder injury, like a few of my clients do have, which would come to me with and not cause them.
Yeah, I hope they had it before they came to you, James, not after.
So with the tricep thing, maybe doing like an overhead dumbbell extension wouldn't be the best exercise, and something where you're not in a lot of shoulder flexion and being pushed into that range with the dumbbell. So that might be not the best tricep exercise for someone, but for someone else who's got a healthy shoulder and they enjoy doing the movement, it might be cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what we were going to go on to with this is, the best exercise for glutes. A lot of people like to think the hip thrust is the best exercise for glutes. And something with the hip thrust in particular. So this is an easy one to kind of target, I suppose. But when we're looking at the hip thrust, and you broke it down when you were on RTS last month, what was the percentages we were talking there, like glute to kind of quad ratio?
When we're like looking at that exercise, when normal setup on the like a box or the ground or wherever, it's looking like 50-50. So when that comes down to that, maybe it's not, if you're getting like 50% of the quads and 50% of the glutes, then we're definitely not like biasing the glutes more than anything else. But these different ways of setting it up, which we can go on to.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, like, so yes, it is an exercise where you can target your glutes, no doubt. But if we're getting 50% glutes, 50% quads, then we're probably going to feel more sensation, or possibly going to feel more sensation in the quads, because the hip joint and the glutes are, they're built for more load. The glutes are going to be stronger. So if you've got 100 kilos on there, for instance, the 50 kilos that's going to the quads is going to feel like more because the quads are going to be weaker. Does that make sense, James?
Yeah, definitely.
So we're not saying the hip thrust isn't a glutes exercise by any means. It is, but it's also, there's other things coming into play. And is it the best potential? Is it the best exercise for training glutes? Well, maybe for some people, but there are certainly better options out there. And you were going to go on to like ways of making it more glute dominant, James, weren't you?
Yeah, definitely. So that thing comes into play where, so there's mainly two forces acting when we're doing like a hip thrust, and that's being the weight of the GRF, so the ground reaction force, which is the main force which we're dealing with. But then we've got a thing called friction, which happens at the feet. So it depends when we push our feet on the ground. Say if we pushed our feet forward, which it sort of makes us do when we normally set up the exercise. So we're going to be forced to push our feet forward, and then the ground's pushing back, meaning it's going to create a bit more of a demand on the quads. And that's why it makes it like 50-50 exercise. But we can actually change that by the way we push our feet. If we actively think about dragging our feet back, we can maybe like get a little bit more glutes out of it. But there's another couple of things that we can do as well.
Yeah, I think a simple way of explaining this, and I think I heard this from Paul at the Muscle Mentors, was if you're in a hip thrust position, you're at the top of the hip thrust. If you were on ice, if your feet would slide forward, then that's going to put more of the emphasis on your quads. If you're on ice and if you're in a position where you would stay exactly where your feet are, then that's kind of where you want it to be to try and get that, resultant force to aim more towards the glutes, really.
Sure. Yeah, that resultant force that's just basically the main force that we're dealing with from the bar and our weight. And then obviously we've got that friction force. So it's both of those combined, which makes that resultant.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose what I was trying to do there is put it simply. It's like if your feet are sliding forward, more quads. If your feet would stay where they are, then that's going to be more on the glutes, and that's more what we kind of want. You said something interesting before we actually came on that you've been doing. Don't know if you want to give away your big tips here, James.
I didn't mainly come up with this. Don't worry. I learned about it on some other courses I'm doing, so they are paying off. So using a wedge. So that really, really helps where you're pushing your feet. If your toes are elevated, so make sure you're not got the wedge like that and you're pushing forward even more. So elevate your toes, and it's going to help maybe shift your feet back a little bit more. Again, like the ice thing, which kind of talks about then. So we're going to bias the glutes a little bit more from the angle of our feet, and they're going to really dig down rather than across into the ground.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose you could use a heel wedge to do that, but you could also just use like a 20 heel plate or something. Really, just anything to elevate your toes would kind of do the job. So yeah, that's cool. We'll move on from that, James. And we'll move on to we're kind of going to take that into. Well, I was going to go squat ass to grass there. Will we talk about that one?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, so some of you guys might have seen, I actually done a post on this during the week there, and I use me and my missus as an example here. But when it comes to squatting ass to grass, Michael from RTS likes to say, how long is the grass? So Michael from Integra should say, but how long is the grass? And that's kind of a good way to sum it up, because for me, for you, squatting is going to be different once again. And it's all going to, well, it's not all going to come down to limb lengths, but one of the things it's going to come down to is your proportions and your limb lengths. So someone like myself, I'd say I'm relatively balanced. I've maybe got a bit of a shorter torso, but relatively balanced. There's a few things we're going to look at. Obviously, torso length, which I mentioned there. Then your upper leg length, so your like femur lengths. And then we're going to look from the knees to the floor there. And the lengths of these three bits is going to determine how you kind of sit down into a squat, essentially. So the example I showed, if you look at my Instagram, at Conor Moran PT on Instagram, you'll see the picture of me. And again, as I say, I'm kind of relatively balanced, and maybe a shorter torso. And I kind of sit a bit more upright, not completely upright, but for me, I think I'm trying to remember where the line of force actually was. It was kind of coming down somewhere through the middle. But again, going back to what we said on the hip thrust stuff, even if it is relatively balanced, you'll probably feel it more in the quads, because the quads are going to be generally weaker than not the hamstrings, the glutes, sorry. So you'll probably feel it more in your quads. So someone like me thinks that doing a squat is an awesome exercise for your quads. But then when we looked at my missus's her squat, she has relatively long femurs, and I wouldn't say she's got a massively long torso, but because of the length of her femurs compared to her knee to floor length, she was having to bring her hips back a lot and therefore fold over a lot. And to get into that, if she was to try and squat ass to grass, she'd probably feel like she was going to fall over, because you need to maintain that center of mass over the midline of your foot. Otherwise, you're just going to fall over. So for her, someone like her, she's probably going to use her glutes more in a squat than her quads are, but she's also going to feel it in her back a lot more, because there's going to be a larger moment arm to her back, because the hips have had to come back further and because she's had to fold into it a bit more. So
essentially, we could do something with the foldability.
Yeah.
As in, there's maybe like two things, like using the blocks or even the width for your feet. That's going to maybe help us stay a little bit upright, get a bit more knee flexion. Just depend on the individual.
Yeah, definitely. So if you take a wider stance, am I right in saying that actually shortens the length of your femurs, doesn't it? Technically, obviously not, not actually shorten them, but makes them, I suppose, slightly shorter. So for someone like her, that might be an option. I don't know. Well, a heel wedge, again, using this on your actual heel this time rather than your toes, that would keep her a bit more upright. So it'd be easier to keep her center of mass. So then she might be able to get a bit more depth there. But yeah, there's going to be other things that come into it as well. Proportions are just kind of what I started on. You can obviously look at your available range of hip flexion, which is when you're going into the squat, as that hip angle closes, that's hip flexion. Some people might struggle with knee flexion, and then obviously you've got ankle flexion as well. So we've got those 3 joints to consider there.
You get a lot of people, I don't know if you've seen it in your clients or people in the gym, where they get to the bottom of a squat and their hips like rounded all the way underneath.
Yeah,
Like,
it's the butt wink, yeah.
Rounding. I mean, that's like they're entering a passive range, aren't they? So that's maybe when you shouldn't be touching asterographs.
Yeah, definitely. 2 seconds, James. For those watching on YouTube, I've got a lovely little example here. Don't know how well you can see this, but essentially what's happening there is as that pelvis kind of tucks under and you get that kind of butt wink, your lower back has got to round. There's going to be this relationship between the pelvis and the lower back. And then you end up looking like that essentially at the bottom of your squat, don't you? And that's not going to be a nice position for the spine, just to put it simply. It's not going to be a nice position.
It's lengthened, isn't it? So it's got to potentially run into a few issues if we're loading that position.
Yeah, with a lot of weight.
With a lot of weight.
Yeah. But I suppose that the moral of that one is that like getting into an asterograss squat for some people is going to be easy and they're going to wonder why no one else can do it. And then for other people, they're going to think squats are a pretty shitty exercise. And this kind of came up for me. The reason I posted about this is because a couple of girls that come to me, they've been training at the gym with their friends, and that they were saying like squats just don't feel right to them. And like when their friend does it, like their friend loves squats, but they're like, oh, I can't get these for some reason. Am I not doing it right? Or, you know, just that kind of feeling like, can I not actually do this? Well, it might not be your fault. It might be your parents' fault. It might be your genetics. You can blame them. But yeah, it might be down to your proportions. It might be down to your available ranges and things like that. So don't think just because something's a brilliant exercise for your friends that it's going to be the best exercise for you. A thing for someone, so in this instance, one of those girls in particular, her femurs are pretty long. So same idea as like my missus, you know, if she went to full depth, she's going to feel like she's going to fall over because of the center of mass. And the other one, it was down to poor hip flexion. If you had poor hip flexion, something like a hack squat or a pendulum squat is probably going to be a good answer for you, because if you imagine the starting position of the hack squat or the pendulum squat, you're at 0 degrees of hip flexion. So on a leg press, well, I suppose on a squat, you're at 0 degrees of hip flexion too, but to get to that kind of depth, you have got to go into quite a lot. But something like a leg press might not be so good if you've got poor hip flexion, because you almost start at 90 degrees of hip flexion. So kind of something like a pendulum squat or a hack squat might be quite a good option to try and train your quads.
Definitely. Have you seen at the moment, or have you ever found at the moment that there's a big emphasis around range of motion, saying if you're not going as low as you can do, then it doesn't count. And it's a big like ego thing. It's gone from the weight where you're lifting a shitload of weight, hardly in range of motion, to large range of motions, and saying getting your, say, in the leg press, getting your knees near your ears, and yeah, you're probably entering a passive range where you can't go for most people, and saying and putting a shitload of stress into your labrum, and that's sort of the in thing at the moment. I don't know if you've seen it on social media.
I suppose like a lot of people will see people doing it on social media, and again, it comes back to, for them, it might be okay. They might have a shit ton of hip flexion, so they might be able to do a leg press and bring their knees all the way back to hit their chest or whatever. But that doesn't mean it's the right option for you. It just means it's the right option for them. And I think a lot of these kind of myths, you know, especially around squat, bench, deadlift, kind of come from powerlifting. And people, oh, you've got to hit the bar off your chest, or you've got to squat ass to grass. It's like, unless you are a powerlifter, then I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but you don't have to follow the rules of powerlifting if you're not a powerlifter. It's like me following the rules of cricket, even though I don't play cricket. I don't know any rules of cricket. I've not got a good example there.
Neither do I.
No, I know fuck all about cricket. If anyone knows anything about cricket, feel free to enlighten us in the rules. But yeah, that's, I suppose, a pretty good example. But yeah, I've kind of lost track of where I was there. Just totally drawing a blank there.
Let's round it up on that and move on to the
What
next
the fuck
one.
were we talking about? I'm like, why am I talking about cricket? How did I get into cricket? Yeah, so exercise rules, I suppose. These rules and regs, and just because you see other people doing something doesn't mean that's what you should do. Just because your favorite bodybuilder does something doesn't mean you have to do it.
Exactly. Do you remember the thing at the time with the adductor? I was training with a bunch of guys, and I think it was like using the adductor and putting it widest setting you can go, and like sliding into it, someone kicking it open, and you're starting at that range. And looking back at it now, I was thinking, what the fuck was we doing? You can just rip your adductor straight off in that range. Stupid. I mean, we've all done stupid shit in the past, but
I think that's important to say, actually, James. We're talking about all this now, but I've done a lot of stupid shit. Don't know about you. I've done a lot of stupid shit.
We've all learned from our mistakes. We have to go there. There's all the stages that we go through, and yeah, I'm glad we've experienced them, and they're the reasons why we don't do them anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Got injuries to show for them as well.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So next one.
What have we gone over?
We've got isolation exercises or the
isolation exercises. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So you want to take over with that, James, or do you want me to?
Yeah, cool. So isolation exercises, let's go elbow flexors being mainly like biceps and stuff.
Just keep it simple. Like, I suppose what we're saying is there is no isolation exercises. And again, where we got this from is we kind of got this from like Michael again at Integra, really. He kind of says there is no isolation exercises. So yeah, bicep curls is an example. On you go, James.
Exactly. So you can't really say we're going to do a bicep curl with a dumbbell. We can't just call it a bicep curl just because there's other things working. We can't fully isolate that muscle and nothing else work. We've got a shitload of muscles doing different roles and jobs around that joint to get us through that motion and into that position that we want. So we've got like the movement basically is elbow flexion. So elbow flexors can be your biceps. That's definitely one of the biggest ones, brachialis, and then somebody like forearm muscles. And then there's another bunch of muscles doing the jobs like maintaining the joint and maintaining the plane of it.
Yeah. So like for those that are watching, or I suppose even we could explain this one, but like maintaining the plane would be if I'm doing a bicep curl and we're just moving back and forth here. It's making sure we don't go away over there or anything like that, basically. So for those that are listening, it's like if the bicep curl is working in that sagittal plane, which is front to back, it's making sure your arm doesn't drift off to one side and go away over from the other side or anything like that. And then, as you say, the ones that are kind of keeping the integrity of the joint, well, they're just keeping the joint intact, I suppose. There's not too much to explain there.
So the ones managing the joint, say if we're flexing our arm, then it would be our tricep. So the ones that's directly opposing the main muscles, so the resistance fighters, which are working.
Yeah, definitely. So whenever we do an exercise, it's not just this is a bicep exercise and that's it. There's always going to be a shit ton of stuff working, I suppose.
Always see things on social media saying, "Oh, this exercise fully isolates the hamstrings or the biceps." It's like, no, it doesn't. Else it wouldn't be moving.
There's maybe some sort of mad science experiment where you could get someone to work like just one muscle and that's it. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works. You could call every exercise bang for your buck. You're getting a shit ton of muscles working every time. So
I mean, you can bias exercises or bias muscle groups towards
bias would be the word.
Definitely, let's use the word bias rather than isolate.
Yeah, I think that's again an important thing to say. It's like although these muscles are working here, they're not going to be working near as hard as like the likes of the bicep is. Like you're although your triceps doing some work when you're doing a bicep curl, it's going to be nothing like the biceps actually doing. So yeah, I suppose that's important to get clear. No one's doing a bicep curl to get their triceps bigger.
Exactly. That brings on something else, which we literally briefly talked about before we jumped on the live. Squats and leg presses and the involvement of the hamstrings. So there's a big thing at the moment on social media going back and forward. saying, oh, your hamstrings work when you're doing a squat or a leg press. So they do have the role, but they wouldn't mechanically be under any load, really. There might be a sensation, but if you say put like an EMG, which measures how much your nervous system is creating output within that muscle, then it will flag up and it will look like it's working quite hard, but that's because it's a joint manager when we've got our quads working.
Yeah. So what the hamstring's doing there, again, we were just talking about this before, and again, to reference Michael from Integra, we were learning about on his anatomy labs course there. So what the hamstring's actually doing there is, everyone's heard of the ACL. Everyone knows what the ACL is, and everyone's scared to damage their ACL. So what the ACL does is it stops the lower leg from basically, like, say you're doing a leg extension, basically just fucking flying off and coming completely off.
We definitely don't want that.
Yeah, I would prefer that not to happen personally. And the hamstring acts as a secondary kind of ACL in these kind of situations, maintaining that kind of, again, integrity of the joint, as you say. Yeah. And also, like, we've got things like the gastroc that's going to be working hard there as well, which gastroc's going to be pulling that kind of compression of that joint, isn't it? It's going to be pulling it back up. The gastroc being one of the calf muscles, of course. But yeah, whenever we do an exercise, I think the moral of that story is there's a shit ton of stuff going on. Shit ton of stuff. And when you think you kind of realize all the things that's happening, someone like Michael shows you something and you're like, okay, there's more than I ever imagined going on here.
Definitely. It's like when so when I was doing the practical exam at uni, I had to demonstrate a sumo deadlift and a normal deadlift and say what the difference is between them. And I said, oh, the quads are working more in the sumo. And it was like, no, it's the adductors that are working more. And I thought, I was like, there's something about that. So anyway, I pulled it up with Michael when I was on RTS the other week. And it's like, I got this question wrong at uni a couple of years back when I was doing my S&C course. And I said it was quads working more, but the guy said it was adductors. And it was like, I was right. It is the quads working more because of the friction pushing back, like we talked about the thing on the hip thrust, the friction pushing back, changing the resultant force. And it's just literally a sensation of stretching your adductors when you're in that position.
So much going on in an exercise to think about when you get into this shit. It's just like, it blows my mind.
Even doctors and stuff at university don't know their shit.
Yeah. It's only people that kind of reach out to do things like RTS, things like that I suppose have this sad kind of interest in it, that really look into it.
I don't understand why exercise mechanics is so neglected.
Yeah, it's probably because to some people it is just boring. And you get, like, I suppose you get a bodybuilder, for instance, let's just say Phil Heath's the first that comes to mind, for example, but I don't know if anyone actually uses him as an example, but like JP, let's go JP, because everyone like the UK talks about that guy. And they're like, well, JP just does a leg press and grows his legs. JP's a terrible example, actually. He actually knows a lot about mechanics.
Yeah, he does.
But like, you know, basically what I'm trying to say is they'll see their favorite bodybuilder doing something. They're like, well, he just does a leg press and doesn't overthink it. So that works. So that's what I'm going to do. And I suppose in a sense, like, you will definitely make a lot of progress just doing exercise and not overthinking it to the degree we are. There's no need to really go this deep. But for us as a profession to be giving the best service to our clients, to be not injuring them in the long term, because again, this stuff should make you feel better, not worse. It is important to go into these things. It is important to know where we're applying forces to in someone's body and how it's going to affect the body and the joints and the muscles. And yeah, for us, we, as you say, there should be more emphasis on it from our point of view as like personal trainers, as online coaches. There should be more emphasis on it for everyone going into the gym. It would be good to know, but I don't suppose it is essential, but it would definitely be good to know. And when you go on about that, actually, me and Paul were talking about the leg press the other day. So we've got, when you're doing a leg press, you've obviously got where you put your feet position is going to change where the emphasis goes between the quads and the glutes. Now, they're obviously both going to always be working, but we can change that emphasis with our foot position. So for those that don't know, generally putting your feet higher is going to create a larger demand on the glutes, and putting your feet lower is going to create a larger demand on the quads. Now, another thing to think about in that is, are you pushing your hips back into the pad? Are you pushing your back into the pad? Because that's going to create, again, another force essentially, and we're going to get a resultant force from that. So when we've got more than one force acting, we're going to get this kind of resultant force. Hopefully that's explained nice and simply there.
It's just when we're lifting a weight or a leg press or anything, when we're touching it, so the application, whether we're touching the pad, the weight, or anything like that, that's an application. So the way we push on that can create a resultant. So like Connor just said there, on a leg press, if you push your hips down into that pad and pull it down, that's going to make your quads a little bit, bias the quads a little bit more. And then say if you push your upper back into that pad, then it's going to bias like the glutes a little bit more. So depending on what your goal is, you can have a play around with those things, which is called intention.
And then the other thing is, you can go a step deeper. It's like, is there any friction on your feet on the pad as well, like on the sled? So like, I mean, these things just grow arms and legs. So it can be a bit confusing for people. So hopefully we've actually busted some myths here, not just confused the shit out of people. So like, I suppose on this stuff, if any of you guys have any questions, please do feel free to like reach out to us. So like, my Instagram handle is at Conor PT, CONORMORAN PT. And then James, what's yours?
JT_Physique Factory.
Yeah. And then we've also got Physique Factory coaching page as well, which we've got some underscores on that as well, don't we?
We do, 2 of them.
Yeah. So where does that come in, James?
Physique_Factory_coaching.
Yeah, cool. I couldn't remember it there. I'm not going to lie. Just kind of put that one onto you. But yeah, if anyone has any questions on any of this shit, please do feel free just to ask. I feel like we've just waffled on about a load of random shit, which is kind of what this podcast is going to be. So if you don't like it, well, unlucky. But but I suppose we'll just wrap it up at that, James, because we have waffled on about enough shit today. So thank you to everyone who's listening to the podcast. We're actually kind of blown away with the response. We're surprised anyone listens to us. But if you guys could help us reach more people, that'd be awesome. So if you could take a screenshot of the podcast and put it up in your story, we would much appreciate that.
Perfect. Cheers for listening, guys.